All right, guys, welcome to episode 3 of From the Booth. I have a special guest today with me, Andy Green. Andy is a DJ, he's a producer, and
No,
he's
well,
also the owner and curator of Verdant Recordings. Andy, thank you for joining us.
my pleasure, Mark. It's really this is the first time we've properly met, so it's a privilege, and I want to thank you for having me along. This is incredible.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, I'm sure we're gonna have a lot to talk about. The first thing that I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the fact that you started your own label. And I've sort of had this own pipe dream of my own. I remember as far back as 2012 of like, what if I started my own label and just put out music that I liked? And even if I took a loss on it, like, would that be something that, on my deathbed, I'd be like, I'm glad I did that. So here you are, basically living out my dream, and I'm living vicariously through you. How did the whole thing get started?
um, I would say it's a similar motivation to your own. um, I guess you probably know this, I've been listening to electronic music for many, many years, 30 plus years since I was a teenager. And you get to a point where you think, this is my culture, this is my scene, this is who I am, essentially. It's a fundamental part of me. And I didn't want to get to a point where it all passed me by and I hadn't actually made any contribution. I've been a consumer in the nicest possible sense of music and the culture. I feel as though I wanted to leave a little contribution, a statement of, and a memory of who I am, really. So that was the principal motivation. Um, I guess as well, you thinking about my children growing up, I've got two adult sons, and they knew I was passionate about music, and I guess me demonstrating that I can do something in that space is also perhaps a nice bit of role modelling for them to think about, and they can be proud of their father actually doing something that's tangible and appreciated by others. So that's fundamentally the reason. Um, the extent of what I've done, I know it's only a small uh, line in the sand, I guess, in the scheme of things, but um, where was I going? It's yeah, it for me it wasn't supposed to be such a big thing. I was going to just release a record as quickly as I can, and the success of the first record, I guess, led and snowballed to other things. That's where it was. So
Okay.
that was about 4 or 5 years ago now that I first had the motivation finally to do that.
Okay. And your first release, if I remember correctly, was the Emerald EP, correct? And that was
Emerald
in
City.
Emerald
Emerald
City.
City.
Okay.
Yeah, which is
Okay.
kind of poetic, given the green thing.
Oh, okay, I get it. And I see a green light in the background. I'm starting to put pieces together here. Okay.
Oh yes. So it could be any colour, but it's green for you tonight.
Okay. And where did the name or word Verdant come from? Does that mean something? Did you just make it
um,
up?
Verdant is another way of saying green, essentially, like verde from Italian, or verdant or vert in French. So it's it's nothing really too complicated.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna pick your brain as if one day I'm gonna start my own label because that's actually a possibility. So how do you source your music? Like, do you have a pipeline of people trying to get released on your label and you're kind of the gatekeeper, or is it
Yeah.
more organic? Like you go out to an event and maybe you DJ and you meet somebody cool and you guys start talking and you're like, hey, I have a label, and then things kind of like spontaneously go from there. Like how does the music come in?
I guess I guess the first one, um, the Emerald, came together based around friendships. With the exception of one person I didn't know at the time, but I've known Lee Dixon. Um, got to know Lee about 6 7 years ago. We're good friends now. Um, I knew Mihal Petrovsky. We've still never met, but we have a good online friendship. Um, I'll perhaps come on to the reason why Mihal's on it later, but and then the other person is Emil Facey as Plant 43. Um, and I know they have made good music one way or another. And so I was trying to find some tracks that would go together nicely on that first EP. John Shemo at the time was just sort of making some headway and gaining some traction and people enjoying his music. So I approached John and he was more than happy to contribute. So that's how that one came together. Um, it was supposed to be quite an eclectic EP. No real rationale in the style of music, but the four tracks that I assembled from them kind of worked. Um, Again, just sort of touching into the different sounds that I enjoy personally. And I guess since then, um, I've largely been cherry picking producers that I've followed myself, have
Hmm.
had their records in my collection. There's a few people that I've stumbled across, probably more than through any intention. Um, and I just sort of try to find a lot of the EPs are split EPs, apart from one, which is one artist on its own. I've tended to sort of blend artists together, find remixers or other producers that I've always enjoyed their productions and admired their productions, and so I just reached out to people, and as the labels gained a little bit of reputation, people have happily come on board. So it's all about mostly connections with friends, um, people I people's whose music I've enjoyed, and just putting them together in a sequence of EPs that I find interesting. um,
Okay.
you know, I have quite an eclectic taste in music, so I've deliberately not tried to sort of position myself on one particular sound. I tried to represent the music that I really enjoy over the releases so far. So that's essentially it.
Okay.
There's, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I made the analogy that you remind me of Delcine because of the it has this level of sophistication to it where it's like the opposite of like a it's techno, but it's not drum code techno, for example.
Hmm.
It's not meant it's for somebody that like you just sip some wine there, so I'll use a wine sipping analogy. It's for a connoisseur more so than it's for somebody that may have just come into the scene. That's what it seems like to me. And even then there's I'm noticing like a little bit of tech house flavor or some electro or even some dub influences here and there. So it does seem to really like spread out and it's not confined to just one sound. Like you don't know exactly what you're going to get on one of your EPs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Like I said, I have a fairly broad taste in music. I like music that has an emotional content, principally, something that is a little bit more cerebral. I mean, I want the music to be soulful. I want you to be able to dance to it. um, I mean, that's how that's music in my head. I'm just trying to I'm just trying to articulate how my head processes music
Mm-hmm.
and put it onto wax essentially. And I do remember your one of the videos where you referenced Delsin, and I was blown away because thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Delsin has been a go-to label for me over the years, and I know Marcel has an amazing taste in music. So and yeah, he's particularly more recently has really diversified his sound and some of the sub labels as well. So it's a huge um, it's really rewarding to hear that
Okay.
comparison. It was never intended, but maybe
Yeah.
just by
Now, did you just mention the owner of Delcine? Is that who you said there? I didn't catch that.
yeah, Marcel van der Wielen, I think is a Dutch guy.
Okay.
I've probably introduced myself a couple of times at events, and there's a few exchanges on the 313 list. He contributes there from time to time, and I've sent him a few messages about releases in the past. So
Okay. Cool. Cool. I did not
it's
know that. I never knew who was behind that label. it's been there for longer than I've been involved in the scene, and it's I never miss one. I don't always buy them, obviously, because
Yeah, yeah,
they have so much variety on there. But even though they're not releases that I want to buy, they're still good. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
It's like I know that this is good for other
Yeah,
people's taste and such. The quality's just there.
yeah, and the artwork. There's a real identity to Delsin that runs through it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even tracks that may not sort of immediately be considered as a, you know, similar, but there's always this, you know, the graphics, the identity, the way that he releases the music, the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real privilege to own those records and
Yeah,
own them.
it is. They're reliable. You mentioned pressing up records, right? So getting back to your label, you have 4 tracks you want to put on an EP.
Yeah.
Were you stressed about finding a pressing plant that was going to do it right? So I've noticed that your records are like thick plates. They seem like they're cut really well. I haven't seen
Yeah.
anybody complaining on the forums about them. So it
Yeah.
seems like, at least from the consumer end, that what you're doing is working. Like you found a system to get these things pressed up in a way that's working for you. Is that true? Is that the case?
I think it's being conscious of the quality. Um, I'm actually I'm happy to disclose this, but my records are produced on the back of a P&D deal with Juno Records, and so that happened after the initial lacquer cut of the first release. So going back to the beginning, this notion about doing one record and a DIY project, I had 101 records cut by hand on a lathe, which seems a bit crazy, but I found somebody who was prepared to do that. It was quite expensive, but we just about worked out the economics to make it a viable project. They sold out mostly to my friends and contacts. Um, and that was the impetus for Jim at Juno to get in touch and ask me to consider doing a repress and then signing up to a P&D deal.
Juno came to you.
Yes. So I know
So
Jim.
so 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 is it an accumulation of people clicking the alert me when this restocks button, and then when it hits a threshold, they take
I
action? Is that
guess
how
so.
that
I guess so.
happens?
Yeah, it's complicated it's reasonably complicated how Juno works, but they support some projects. Basically, the system works. You submit a project to them, audio, graphics. They press the records when they have sufficient volume to be able to get their money back on your investment, essentially. Um, Without going into the financials too much, I get a small amount back to be able to cover the costs of basically buying the music. So it's quite
Ah, okay.
a low
Okay.
risk business model as a label head. I can compare it to another. We can come on to Vertex later. That's done differently, but the Verdant was done through Jim at Juno because they thought the project was credible and could sustain a
Yeah.
series of labels, a series of releases.
Okay.
Um, Now the Juno system works. They have, I guess they have an arrangement with a cutting studio. It's called Curved or Curve Pusher. They have an amazing facility. Not, it used to be in London. It's moved down to the south coast here. But Lawrence Dunster and Keith Tennerswood are the principal sound engineers at that studio, and they are extremely experienced and extremely talented engineers. And yeah, so they do a fantastic job of actually cutting the lacquers, and then they get sent to Juno's pressing plant. Yeah.
Okay. So I
So
know. Oh, sorry, Andy. Go ahead.
no. So yeah, I mean, the, that whole system gives you a quality product. And I was quite keen at the beginning to have, you know, a nice heavy wax. You go in with high hopes of being able to produce high quality records
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I appreciate, and they were able to do that.
That's awesome. So I noticed most of the releases in the catalog and Discogs will have a test pressing associated with them, and I've always been fascinated by test pressings because I feel like there's probably a lot of stories behind some of those tests. Like when you get the test pressing, do you do you go and sit down and listen to it on your perfect system and make sure it's perfect, or do you have your friends come over and listen to it too? Like, hey, do you guys think this is a go? Does any like how hard are you screening it, and how are you screening the pressing?
Oh, that's a good question. I think at the beginning, it's really about hearing the imperfections. You know, if there's anything that's glaringly obvious with how it's going to enjoy your detract from the enjoyment of the record. So it's more about listening to imperfections. I'm not one to scrutinise a record for the frequencies of the hats being out. It's just as long as it's nice to listen to and doesn't scream at you, I'm faulty. So yeah, I listen to them carefully at home principally, and then make
Okay.
sure that they're good to go. I had some of the artists like to have a little a listen first, give them the opportunity to approve.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Lee's a good friend. He's got an amazing pair of ears. He works in hi-fi, so he's able to offer his opinion on what's a good record as well.
Okay.
So that's essentially it. There's been one or two records that have given us a few headaches.
You had to send
But
them back. Now, did you send them back and then they do a recut and send you another test?
yeah, so I might as well say this is a nice story, but the record with Sonatus Echo and EOS, um, Justin's track, one of the tracks had like 2 minutes of sort of hissy ambience, which is lovely to listen to, but it wasn't it wasn't conducive to an easy cut. So
Ah, okay.
lots of phasing in that in those frequencies, and basically Laurie tried a couple of times to get a nice cut, and he couldn't do it.
Okay.
So in the end, we had to chop off about a minute of music to make it work.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But
Yeah, I
I
mean
think it's
that's the whole point of the test, that not everybody's going to pass the test, or not everyone's going to work out right from the get. So,
exactly. So it's an experience, but like I said, it's about making sure it's an enjoyable listen. I know some people can get really, really quite uptight and anal about the quality of their test press. But I'm fortunate that the system that I'm working with produces good cuts, I guess.
yeah. Great.
It takes a lot of the stress away from it. I mean, I have to say, Keith Tenniswood as a mixing engineer, he has such an ear. I don't know what he does with his tracks. He never really gives too much away. Um, I had the opportunity to go down and sit in on that studio session to hear the mastering done and the cutting
Hmm.
done. And he says, "Oh, I'm just doing it, doing it." Never really gives his tricks away, but he has such
Okay.
an amazing ear and knack for producing really clean um, bass. The bass lines always sound really, really warm and undistorted and just really quite pure. And I don't know how he achieves that, but I'm very grateful that he can.
Okay. Now, is when you say mixing engineer, I'm not a producer. So is that somebody that's on the pressing side, or is it somebody in the studio that's mixing down all the elements into the final track?
So how it works? The producer sends a final version. They've done a mix, an edit of their track, a final mix down, as it were. Um, the preference from the engineers, the cutting engineers' point of view, is to have a track that's about -6 dB. So it then gives them a little bit of headroom to basically do. They take a single track. They don't split it into stems or individual components. They
Mm.
purely
Hmm.
mastering for vinyl. So it's doing some EQ essentially, some maybe a little bit of compression, a bit of limiting, but just carefully EQing to remove the conflicting frequencies or boost some that may be absent in the original mix down, and then finding a level that will cut nicely on the record.
Okay.
So Yeah, so it's a combination of obviously the source material, how good the producer is at getting his final mix, but there's certainly some magic that happens at the cutting
Okay.
room.
Sounds like you want that guy in your corner, whoever this mystery man is, right?
Yeah, so you know, are you familiar with the name Keith Tenniswood?
No, no.
So Keith is he's a producer himself. Largely his current main producing name is Radioactive Man. He makes quite stripped down electro, quite tracky, pretty intense music. But Keith also had a lot of work, a lot of time working with Andrew Weatherall
Hmm.
of Sabres of Paradise, and his project with Keith was Two Lone Swordsmen. So I think that's a project that goes back into the mid '90s, and so that clearly working with Andrew, and that's given him a huge appreciation of how to engineer sound.
Okay. It's funny you mentioned Weatherall. My friend Doombot, who I featured in the first episode of From the Booth, is all about Andrew's music. He's been going back and listening to some of his 90s mixes, which
Yep.
I'm assuming were all done on vinyl. And some of those mixes are just nasty, man. That guy was good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many lovely stories about Andrew. He stepped into the acid house scene almost by accident. He was into Northern Soul and rockabilly, but latched on to that movement around the late '80s, and I think he started DJing in some of the early parties in London, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
That gave him the platform to start working with big groups like the Happy Mondays, Primal Scream, and the rest is history. So I'm
Right.
going to give a shout to my friend Rick. So Rick Hopkins, who was on the Verdant compilation, he produced a track as Subsequent. So Rick is my oldest friend. We've known each other since we were 9. We,
Oh,
we went to
wow.
the, we went to the same school. We're still kicking around together, listening to techno. But there was a gap in the middle where, as it, where we sort of went in different. Well, I guess we just lost track of each other. But Rick was a protege of Andrew Weatherall. Actually,
Okay.
Rick won a competition in a mix mag, a DJ mixing competition, and that was his platform to start being a resident at Andrew's earlier parties in London.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I wish I'd gone to those events because the blood sugar parties were, you'd have loved it. I mean, it was proper basic channel dub techno parties.
Oh, yeah. That does sound like it would be right up my alley.
And Rick's the thing that runs through Rick's music is his passion for dub techno.
Yeah, dub techno has really, since about 2006, I would say I just started to get into it, and Echo Space was my gateway
Right.
into dub techno. I think I started with the Coldest Season, and I was like, this is interesting, but
Yeah.
it's not something that newbies tend to get to right away. I was in the scene for a couple of years, and I stumbled into it somehow.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, that was probably my first sort of serious appreciation of dub techno was similar actually. I think was I can't remember. Probably yeah, it must have been the Coldest Season, and obviously so much followed that. But that
Hmm.
was that was my entry point for going back, and I think I had some of the M series and some of the
Yeah,
BC stuff, but I'd never really explored it
yeah.
until I gained an appreciation of what they were doing. Yeah.
M series is great. I like M6 and M7 B side is my top pick out of the whole lot of the M series. M7 B side.
Yeah.
It has this kind of lightning storm sense to it. Like it
Yeah.
feels like a storm's coming, it passes, and then it
Well,
goes off into the distance. That's what that track is to me. A very well coordinated storm.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Verdant compilation, which is behind me. I really like the cover art for that. And that's another aspect to releasing a physical release that, I mean, I guess the digital release can have an image for it, but when I think of records, like, I'll be honest, and no offense to the artists on your labels, but I don't know the names of them. You know, like, I like the purple and yellow one, so like I'll play that one. But to me, it's
Right.
the purple and yellow record,
Yeah.
right? So, do you have one person doing your art, or do you call on different people? Like, hey, do you want to do this one?
So where are we now? The Emerald City cover was a painting I saw. Um, we went back to it was an after party, okay, at Sophie O'Leary's house. Okay, now Sophie is Lee Dixon's girlfriend.
Okay.
And I took a shot. This was about the time we were thinking about releasing a record, and I saw the painting, and it's green. And I said, "Wow, I love your painting. It looks a bit like Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz."
Yeah.
And can I use that for a cover? And she said, I'd love to do that. Obviously, I knew Sophie was a talented artist. So that was the first one, and the intention was that Sophie would do a few with me, and she's been great. She's given me 4 or 5 paintings to choose from.
Oh, that's awesome.
So she's the resident artist.
Yeah.
I take the paintings, we scan them. I do all the layout myself. I'm just amateur Photoshopper.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the design's so simple, because I don't have the skills to do anything too difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, most of the artworks come from Sophie. You mentioned the Verdant one. That's a nice story. I remember once I had a bottle of a green ink. You know, I'd stamped the test presses, okay, and a bottle of ink had tipped over in my drawer, and sort of just it was like a chromatographic effect. It just sort of seeped into a piece of paper that was in my drawer. And all this green ink became all these different colours, and I thought, I know what I'm going to do.
Oh, okay. I get it.
So that particular sleeve, that was a project with me and my little daughter. I think she was 3 years old at the time. So we just had some fun playing around with some ink and parchment and just creating this organic mess.
That's so cool. Because
And
I just looked at it objectively. Hey, I like those colors. There's this whole story behind it, and we
yeah,
never would have known it.
it's a kind of happy accident. Again, I wanted Fleur to be involved in a project so that when she's older, she can say, "Yeah, I did that with my dad." So I don't know whether you've got a copy with the extra print, but that 100 of those records were released with a numbered individual piece of artwork.
I
So
don't know. I mean, hang on. Let's see here.
I'll get mine.
Looks like no.
So I'm sorry, Mark.
Mine did not come with one.
So this is what I'm referring to. So we did, to make it kind of a special thing, Fleur and I did 100 individual paintings, pieces of artwork. We numbered them and signed them together.
Oh, that's great, man. That is so great.
And it was it was a bit like the Geigling, they do the individual records.
Hmm.
I thought let's do some of that. So that was a nice way to get Fleur involved again.
That's great, man.
I did actually. I did ask people sending photos back from all around the world to the Verdant Recordings Facebook group. So there is a thread of all the paintings and where they ended up around the world.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, artwork. I mean, the artwork. Going back to what you said, artwork. I'm quite visual with music. I can never remember track titles, but having something in my mind that reminds me of the record is important. and the whole concept of having records as sort of like pieces of artwork, something to visualize, comes from my, buying pop music in the 80s, holding a record and having something tangible. I used to remember the records by what was on the sleeve. It's simple as that. So, you know, I think it makes the listening experience so much more rewarding when there's something you can actually attach to the music.
I
And
totally agree.
each record, there is it might be a little bit cryptic, but there is actually a subject matter behind each record. Something that's in my head that I kind of want to express.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and Emerald City was just about me being a dreamer.
Okay. Well, here you are. So how did you end up pairing up with Exalt to form Vertex or
Ah, that's nice actually, because um, I didn't know Jamie. I had bought some records from him when he was sort of starting out. I bought them in just as a record because he was trading at a festival. He had a record store and was selling some records, and I bought them off him. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you need to buy this record," so I bought one, and it was a Discogger actually, but I just had them as Exalt records, and then I guess it would have been 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I met Jamie, and he said, oh, it was after I'd done a couple of releases, sorry, and Jamie said, I really like what you're doing. You've actually inspired me, because his Exalt had parked itself. It had been dormant for about 10 years. And Jamie said, I really like what you're doing. I'm going to get Exalt running again. Then he asked if I could do an interview of him, just us talking a bit like this now. I interviewed Jamie as an article about the sort of the rebirth of Exalt for Timeline Music, the website that I'm attached to, and we just met up, had some beers, started talking, and he said, I was actually inspired by what you were doing with Verdant recently to get back into putting Exalt back on the map, and so we said, okay, well, we should do a record together at some point. So
okay.
we've become friends, and Vertex was born out of just a shared interest of trying to achieve something together.
That's
Simple as
awesome.
that.
So did Octal Industries come to you because of the partnership with him, or had you already been speaking to people, or I guess it's Jonas, right? Is Octal, right?
Yeah, no, I've known Jonas. Oh, sorry, known of Jonas's music. Scandinavian dub techno. It's a big chunk of anyone's collection if you're in that space. Um, and that again, it's another organic experience. But um, I've done some mixes for a podcast series called Avenue Red. Alec Pritchard has curated those over many years, and he's always gone after people that are really passionate about good music. And then it must have been about 18 months ago, Jonas had done a podcast, and in the little the words that people attach to a podcast, what it's about, what you're up to, Jonas had said, well, I'm working on this and this. One day I'd like to release this ambient record. So I sort of just took that as a cue, and I contacted Jonas. I said, this ambient record, Jamie and I were looking for something to release. And I said, Jamie, should I contact Jonas? How do you fancy that? And he said, yeah, do it. So, and the results were perfect. It blew us away when we first got the demos, or they were nearly finished tracks, or not quite finished in terms of mastering or mix downs. But Jonas sent us this working album, and between us we came up with the final track list. And it was a lovely project. It's like so many things happen almost by accident.
Yeah.
And I'm not. Almost sounds too good to be true, almost contrived, but my whole way of doing the label is just sort of see what happens. There's no master plan. The focus is on the music.
Yeah, yeah. So I have to say that Octal Industries album is great. It was in episode 1, and I stand by what I said there, that it is just a great album from start to finish. So I'll give everybody a link down below to that again.
Okay, thank you. No, it really is a magnificently crafted album, and you can, listening to it over and over again, you can hear so many ideas, you can hear so many emotions that have been poured into those tracks. It's an honour to be able to put that out, because and I can't believe it wasn't out sooner through another channel.
Yeah.
So I feel very blessed to have been involved.
Yeah, it's very, very warm and very emotional. I agree with your assessment there.
So, and
So,
yeah, sorry, just to say, I mean, it's been a pleasure to get to know Jonas and understand his music a little bit more, and through that, so many other connections as well.
awesome. I want to switch over to a topic that you just sort of brushed on there, which was doing these recorded mixes and podcasts. If this is too much secret sauce and you don't want to tell us how you do it, that's fine. But do you have a procedure or a system for your Verdant sessions that you've recorded? Like, do you quality control them? Do you just let it rip, and no matter how it turns out, you release it? Like, how do you approach that?
So the timeline sessions, I have a monthly Verdant session on timeline. I've been doing that about 6 years. I get it's all of the above. I mean, sometimes I just don't have the time to prep. I just sort of get on, go live. Okay, what we're going to play tonight. Perhaps with some sort of overarching idea of what sound I wanted to do in a particular show.
Mm.
Some of them I've more carefully planned out. I might spend the afternoon before just sort of grabbing some records and trying a few things out, see what works. So yeah, there's a mixture. There's no one system. You go on my Verdant Recordings SoundCloud page. I'm quite prolific, and many of those are just spontaneous things that I do. Start playing records, hit record, and see what happens. Essentially, there's some which are again a bit more thought out, but and they all tend to have be anchored in one particular sound space.
Right, maybe a particular mood.
Mood.
Right?
That's essentially it.
Yeah, like
If
I'm gonna go
feeling
dark.
angry, I'll play.
Yeah, dark. You could do melancholy. You could do happy. Sunny day.
Absolutely.
Different types of feelings there. When I do mine, because I know that they're recorded, and YouTube could last 100 years. I don't know how long YouTube's going to last, and I guess that's an interesting thought in and of itself. But you put these mixes up and they're permanent, so I feel like the bar to have them be nice is higher than if I'm playing a DJ set where maybe I make a mistake and it's not that big of a deal, because it's archived permanently.
Yeah.
So like you said, I'll try to pull my records ahead of time, test a couple of blends if I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. Like, not actually mix it, but just play the two records next to each other and see if it's going to fly at all, that type
Absolutely,
of a thing.
yeah.
And I was trying to record one over the weekend that didn't go well, so I think I'm going to scrap it. But I was telling my girlfriend that, you're playing a mix maybe that has 15 or 20 tracks. It's hard to pull that off 15 or 20 times and not have one. Sometimes like you think you have them locked in and something just, they're not, right? You thought they were and they're not. And, you'll not train wreck, but it kind of sullies the whole thing.
I know what you mean. I think we all like to be perfectionists. We don't like things that jar, whether that's tempo or key, wrong track at the wrong time. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? It's an experiment most of the time. It's being creative. So I've got to a point now, if things are, there's a little bit of, I'm not 100% happy with it, I'll let it go. I'm probably a bit more judicious about quality control for maybe a podcast for other people, because you don't want to, you don't want to yeah, you don't want to drop the bar too far. It's
It,
nice to have something that you can be proud of, and you're giving it over to somebody else
mhm.
to support you. So, and at the end of the day, you don't want people to think, "That's what a terrible mix." Well, how did that get out?
Yeah, yeah. Now I've had mixes that have had blips in them where maybe the mix started to drift and I recovered and it, that particular blend turned out okay. And then I've had people message me telling me how great the mix was. And
Yeah,
it's funny to think that I almost threw it into the dustbin because of some blemish that it had. And here I'm overlooking the fact that maybe it has all great music and somebody really enjoyed it. So
quite,
there.
quite. I think your own ear is always much more um, much more diligent,
Critical.
much more scrutinising than
Y-
a casual listener. And let's be honest, most people are going to play a mix once. They're not going to be giving it 100% attention. They're just going to have it on in the background or talking to friends or whatever. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
that's very good perspective. So do you sneak your own records into your mixes, or when you play out, or when you do a recording?
um, from yes, I try. No, if I have a release coming out, I try and play one of the tracks. And I'm not a big one for pushing. Hope I'm not for pushing my agenda on social media. But I always like to sort of have a track of a forthcoming release available for people to hear before it's actually out. So yeah, I know some people might do a mix and they'll have 5 or 6 tracks of their label in it. No, that's too much.
Okay, you just sneak
So
them in there. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
okay. Now I noticed in that little video you sent me the other day that you have 1200s.
Yeah.
Do you have this specific model number that you're attached to? Like some DJs will only play on M3Ds and some will play on MK2s and such. What do you have?
Um, it's quite a nice story. Somebody I'm actually a really late starter to vinyl DJing. Okay. I only started vinyl mixing about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. And that was on the back of a friend asking me to look after her record collection while she was in transition. And she gave me a deck to play on. She said, "Can you look after my deck whilst you're looking after my records?" And I had CDJs, some really crappy old Denon CDJs that I was messing around with ambient mixes with. So she said, "Yeah, look after this," and that was the catalyst for me, sort of really playing records and wanting to actually try and mix. So I bought myself another deck, um, and it was an M3D that I was given. But fortunately, I think the M3Ds are probably one of the better models. They don't have the click.
Mm-hmm.
They're still pretty analog. So I've got M3Ds, and that's what I like. And I much when I'm at friends' houses or somewhere else, I much rather use these than a later model or even a 1210 with the dodgy pitch in the middle.
Other people have talked about the click. Everybody hates the click.
So
You have to just
no,
move the other record's pitch away so that you're not near the click.
yeah,
Basically, the,
exactly.
the fix for that.
But
I
yeah,
I
so
have M3Ds too, by the way, and I find them to be very trusty. I don't
yeah,
know how dialed in they are as far as pitch accuracy at this point because I got them used. So
okay,
they could be 25, 30 years old for all I know. But like, for example, if I put the same record on both turntables and put them both at 6, they're not going to be lined up.
okay.
Do you follow me?
I yeah. I had mine serviced about 18 months ago.
Okay.
There's a tech engineer close to here. Shout to Ant. Um, he stripped them apart, rebuilt them, calibrated. I had them. I had all the audio connections upgraded, so new RCA's. Had the tone arms rewired with high quality Litz wire. I've got nice carts. I've got nice isolation, and honestly, they do sound nice now.
Oh, okay. You got me thinking. Maybe I should send mine in for a tune-up with as much as I use them. Maybe I should.
I think if you appreciate audio, it's definitely worth doing.
Okay. I've had my RCA's done and I had the internal ground done, which I'm thankful for because it's one less wire coming out of there.
Yeah, no, it's worth it. I think,
Yeah.
and
The
these are going
order.
to go for another 20 years. I hope.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so. I'd like to keep mine for the rest of my life if I can.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah. What
I'm
cartridge
still.
do you like, Andy?
Oh, I started with Concords, nightclub twos, and then I always thought they lacked a little bit of bottom end. I read a nice article on Resident Advisor about the history of the Shaw M44-7, and yeah, people. I've had friends using them, so I bought some when they were being made a few years back, and I've not looked back from those. And I've now switched over to Jaico. Jaico make a Shaw copy, and the DJ improved Jaico needle is the one to get to replace the old Shaws. If anything, they're better.
Okay. I might get you to send me a link after this because I don't know anything about the Shores. I've been working with Ortofons since I
Okay.
started, and I have the new one. If you can see the little yellow box behind
Oh
me,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Concord Club, they sound great as far as my ears are concerned. And the other thing that I noticed is because mine are old, the screw-on attachment where it kind of like threads and tightens it,
Yep, yeah, yeah.
they seem to sit better in there than my old standard Ortofon Concord cartridges. Like
Okay.
maybe it was off by a fraction of a millimeter in some way, but now when I just tighten it down, I'm not getting like only sound out of the left and not the right, which
Yeah.
that's a very
I've
precarious
had the same
prop.
problem.
Yeah,
Had the same problem with Concords. You might lose a channel intermittently. Yeah.
yeah, and who wants that on top of everything else while you're trying to mix vinyl? It's a
Yeah.
minefield. It's a complete minefield to try to play a vinyl set, and to have that also as a variable, no, no.
Yeah. So yeah, this is yeah. I've got a nice setup at home, and this is I have an office here, which is I work at home at the moment, obviously like most people, but normally I'm working about half my time here, and very lucky to have like an outbuilding to my house, which is my home office and this music space. So it's been
Okay. And are you
I can
able
play
to
loud in
contain?
here.
You're allowed to go hard in there. Is that
I
is
can
that
go
what I'm
hard
hearing?
in here. My neighbours are very understanding. So we've had a few loud all-nighters in here. I can get about 6 or 7 friends in here comfortably. So it's a great space for that.
That's great. My apartment now is I can only go so loud before my upstairs neighbor will just go ballistic. So coincidentally, we just signed a lease to move to a new place, and I made sure that I could have a music room there. So I'm gonna be getting back to my old roots of playing as loud as I want, basically.
Yeah, you need it. You need it.
Yeah,
What's the point of being able to play records unless you play them loudly
I know.
or at a level that you enjoy?
Well, there's something about some of these records that when they hit a certain volume, especially if you have a subwoofer and you're not afraid to turn that on, it
Yeah,
changes the.
the harmonics in the bass certainly. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's not just I'm hearing it, I'm feeling it. It's a, and I find that it's easier for me to record a mix at that level where it starts to like feel nice.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
easier for me to like mix and get into it. When I'm mixing in my apartment, I feel like I'm so like uptight because the music's soft and it's just
yeah.
not the right, it's
I
not the
hear
right
you.
environment.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a sub in the corner. It's not that loud, but it just fills in that low space to round everything off.
Do you know what kind of sub that is and what size?
um, yeah, it's. I have to thank Lee, and I still haven't paid for it. I met Lee Dixon, from the first record. Like I said, Lee works in audio hi-fi installations, and in the course of his work, he has the opportunity to take equipment from places, donated. So the sub I have here it's a HK Sound Cinema sub, okay, It came out of a THX system, so it's a really quite expensive sub. I think that it's about 15 years old. That model was about $4,000 when it was sold. And it's got two heavy duty 10-inch drivers, X and Y configuration.
Oh, man.
So it just sits there just tickling in the corner. But he said, I can't use this. You need it in your music room.
That thing sounds like a monster. Two
It's
tens?
really nice.
Two tens
It's
is
just what I
that's a
needed.
lot of power for one little room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
I bet you have it turned all the way down, like just above zero.
just a tickle, just a tickle. Except maybe some nights we just crank it up a little bit. But
It's awesome, man.
it's great for listening to, listening to some Rod Modell and hearing all those little
Oh yeah.
modulations in the bottom end. It's just so nice.
Yeah, things that he designed into the track and that are changing and morphing, but you're certainly not going to hear that on earbuds or maybe not even like a 5-inch, studio
Exactly.
monitor. You need
Quite.
something that can represent those
Yeah.
low frequencies.
Yeah. I'm lucky. We talked about test pressings and scrutinizing those. I can get inside the records in my little space here because of the monitoring that I have.
It's awesome. All right. Well, Andy, I want to thank you for joining today. Oh, let me give a shout out to your record here. Guys, check out Andy's new Changing Seasons on Vertex. You have Mike Schamer, Grit, ASC, Octal Industries, and M.A.M.P all doing remixes on that all-star lineup. And I've listened to this and I love it.
Thank you.
Andy, you're quite a character. You're a great interview. I'm so happy to have you on here.
My pleasure. I mean, we've been talking about me for 50 or 30 minutes, but it's funny. I joined Discogs. Actually, I think might be my Discogs day today, 11th of October, isn't it? If I'm correct. This is the day I joined Discogs 18, 19 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And for all my Discog friends that I have in real life now, we always compare our Ogs days. It's kind of a badge of experience.
Hmm.
Anyway, but so we have this long history of being on Discogs, part of that original community, and that's actually how I got to know so many of my current friends, real friends. Um, and then thinking about yourself, as someone who's always been on the Dub Techno forum for most of that time, it was always a treat to read your interpretations of records. If there was a Mark Anthony review of a record, A, it was a good record, and B, it was a good review. So I always placed a lot of confidence in what I was reading, and that was always a benchmark for actually whether I wanted to, go and treat
Oh,
myself to that record.
oh, it's so awesome. That's so
I
great
mean,
to hear that.
and we you know, it's funny how some people you don't get to know until it's probably too late.
Mm,
So it was really nice that we connected recently, and to be chatting to you, it's pretty amazing actually. So
it's
thank you.
awesome. It's been great. Couldn't ask for more.
My pleasure.
All right. Take care and have a great night, Andy.
Take care, Mark.
All right.